Hello and welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 50, brought to you by Wicked Tree Gear. Today, we're getting spring whitetail habitat tips from Jeff Sturgis, so stay tuned. What is up, gang? You are listening to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, and today we have part 2 of the DIY Report Habitat mini-series that we're doing with Jeff Sturgis. And today we're focusing in on all things that are related to spring habitat. Great conversation with Jeff. I really enjoy, particularly this time of year that we're going to be talking about spring. It's a time, of course, you can kind of get outside. Hopefully the cold weather has left us by that point. And you're able to kind of get your hands in the dirt and kind of, it's really for me, spring turkey hunting is kind of happening close to the same time, at least here in PA. It opens a little later than in some states. But I really kind of start to get the itch again for hunting because I'm able to get back outside, enjoy the weather, enjoy the timber, and things of that nature, get your hands in the dirt and really start kind of shaping things, for the upcoming year. So spring is always an exciting time. Speaking of habitat updates, or habitat improvements, let's take a quick moment to talk about a few of our partners. Wicked Tree Gear, of course, it's the longest lasting, fastest cutting, toughest tree trimming equipment you've ever used. Simply put, the toughest saw on earth. Great, of course, when you're doing any type of habitat improvement that involves cutting. And right now, when you visit wickedtreegear.com and use the promo code TRUTH, you will save yourself 20% on any of your Wicked purchases. One of my favorite things to do during the spring, of course, is starting to watch the antler growth from the beginning of spring or from mid-spring through the summer, and nothing makes that easier than hanging yourself an Exodus outdoor gear and Exodus trail camera in the timber. Life's a passion. Pursue it. These guys are awesome. I don't know that there's a whole lot left to be said for these guys in terms of the quality of their products and their customer service. So just do yourself a favor and visit them at ExodusOutdoorGear.com and order a new camera today, and use the promo code TRUTH at checkout and save yourself $20. And of course, spring is that time of year when we're all doing a lot of planning, depending on what your habitat goals are. A lot of folks start their planning in the spring. And if you're doing that this year, you want to take a look at Tecumani Seed. Tecumani Seed Company is a company that's from Texas. It's been used a lot in the South. It's extremely drought resistant, great product. So no matter if you're in the South, the Midwest, or the North, Tecumani Seed has your food plot needs covered. And visit them at tecumani.com and check out their product selector tool to help you pick the right seed for your food plots. Use the promo code TRUTH at checkout and save yourself 20%. And one last quick shout out. So this was a gentleman by the name of Mike Schwarzenberger. Mike, if I hope I pronounced your name correctly. If not, my apologies. But we were going to hook up at ATA, and things just didn't kind of work out for us to run into one another. But he is a coffee roaster, and roasts a blend of coffee that is called, let me look at this real quick so I make sure I get the name right. The company, I think, is Hemisphere Coffee Roasters, and that's hemispherecoffeeroasters.com. And he shared a bag of his Awaken the Hunter's Blend coffee with both John and I. It was really cool of him to send it over to us. We wanted to hook up with him while we were at ATA just to kind of connect, and didn't get a chance to, and so he mailed it out to us. Had a chance to try it. It's awesome. For any of you guys out there that are coffee nuts, kind of like I am, you definitely want to give this a look. And it's, of course, hunter approved by hunter for hunter. So it's definitely worth looking into for any of you coffee aficionados out there. And since we do have a little bit of time and these podcasts are shorter in nature, I did want to take a quick second to ask a favor of everyone listening. If you could head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes, we'd be very much appreciative of that. That's helpful to us in terms of helping new people find the podcast on iTunes that might be into hunting, or in this mini series specifically into habitat updates and so forth. It would help turn more people onto the show, which would be awesome to just kind of grow our community. So if you could do that for us, that would be very much appreciated. And now, without further ado, let's get to the man of the hour, Jeff Sturgis, and spring habitat updates. All right, folks, we are live, and you are listening to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, and we are joined by the one, the only Jeff Sturgis from Whitetail Habitat Solutions for part 2 of our Habitat DIY report planning, or mini-series, rather. Jeff, how you doing?
Doing great. Doing great.
Good. So, hey, we won't waste any time here and beat around the bush. We'll just go ahead and jump right in. So, we're talking spring habitat planning, and this is probably the time of year that people, oftentimes most, I guess think about their habitat most frequently because it's the time when people are out doing a lot of food plotting and turkey season's just kind of getting started and maybe in some places wrapping up. And so you really start to kind of get the juices cranking for whitetail season again. So let's just start off by asking you, what type of habitat updates do you prioritize completing or doing during the spring months?
Well, I love the springtime of year, and really what I'm looking at is there's a few things. For one, it's chemical control. So if I'm looking for chemical and weed control on either upcoming food plots or frost-heated switchgrass or switchgrass that I'm going to be drilling in May or late April, then when you get into spring, it's a great time to start practicing chemical control. One of the things that I think is an often missed period of time that is a great time to get some forage to the deer herd is that period of time before spring greenup. So I'm talking about a lot of times snow is melted and there's not much snow in March. The spring greenup doesn't take place till, let's say, till mid-April, late April, early May in most areas. And so there's a time there where everything's brown, everything's dead, and clover is not going to wake up until spring greenup. Alfalfa is actually a little bit after that. So you really have nothing. The one thing that covers that is a cereal grain of either winter rye or winter wheat. And so that's an opportunity on a lot of properties. If you're using that as a percentage in your food plots in the fall, it stays green through the wintertime. And then as soon as deer enter that post-winter recovery, it's a great period of time for them to hit that winter rye. And as soon as spring greenup takes place, there is an explosion of food everywhere in the north half of the country. And the deer will stop actually eating that winter rye or winter wheat. But that 4 to 6 weeks before spring greenup, that food source can be a critical post-winter recovery tool that landowners can use to hit a really needy time in the whitetail woods.
Right. And so do you think, I'm trying to read the tea leaves here a little bit, but, do you think that greenup is the most critical piece for a property to have during this time of year? Or are there some other things that you think kind of give some competition in terms of priority this time of year?
As far as what's important for deer at that time of year, once you hit spring greenup, they have the whole world basically. They have all the food, they have tons of cover. There's no hunting pressure. The temperatures are getting warmer. The energy levels are being refueled, and so they really have a lot of good things going. But as far as timing though, and what landowners can do, I really like to focus on that switchgrass, and then at the same time, the winter rye, winter wheat. That's something that I think should have as a good percentage in your fall food plot program, so that should already be there. And then lastly, I know we're going to talk about water holes more into the summertime, and I think we should, but this is also a great time to start water holes and digging water holes in. I like using a 110-gallon tank, but if you want to talk about that for a little bit, this is a really good time to put it in. The ground's soft, getting spring rains, and it's a great time to put a new water hole in and let it take shape going into the springtime and into the summer.
Yeah, let's talk about water holes a little bit here, because this year was the first year that I really had an opportunity to use one. I didn't, fortunately, I guess for my back, maybe I had a natural water hole in the form of a spring-fed water hole on this new property, so I didn't have to do any digging. It actually drained down into a second water hole, so I actually had two really nice water holes. And I got some great trail camera pictures around the water hole. So I guess let's talk a little bit about what, the importance of water holes, how you like to use those, and and how you feel they add to a property overall.
Well, I love the strategy of water hole, and it's almost like if you have a pond or a river or a creek on your property already, you're kind of missing out on an opportunity to direct traffic in the fall with water. Deer don't necessarily need water on a weekly or certainly daily basis. Even they pull a lot of their moisture needs and requirements through the vegetation that they eat. So you can have deer go through the entire summer for weeks, months at a time without needing to actually take a drink. However, the one area that I love using water for is if you have deer that are bedding dry, meaning no creek, no pond, no water source within their bedding areas, then adding water in the form of a small water source on the way to their afternoon food source is just a dynamite spot. And a lot of times I'm talking about areas that are maybe even between bedding areas, that's sometimes inappropriate, but at the same time, a lot of times where they're between their bedding areas, between the food source. So we might be 100, 150 yards off a field edge, and ends up being a lot of those times are great cruising locations too, or locations are great cruising locations. And so if you have dry bedding on the way to food, and you can match that up with mature buck cruising time for the rut, then you can have an outstanding spot for a water hole. Now, water hole, you don't need an acre pond. And a lot of times when someone's putting in an acre pond, you're just taking a lot of habitat away that you can use for bedding areas, especially on small properties. So my favorite form of water hole right now is a 110-gallon tank. Now there's some that you make with a mini excavator, a 20-foot in diameter, have a berm on one end and a slope. That's great too. But for a lot of people, that's just not practical, or they don't have the resources. So I have a lot of 110-gallon tanks. I get mine from actually TSC. They're $75. So a fairly cheap option. I actually dig them all the way into the ground below the level of the ground so that you can collect groundwater and get rain into those water holes. And I started out by using half barrels, 27.5 gallons. Mm-hmm. And that was maybe early 2000s, mid 2000s, and they just don't last long enough. And so I encourage people, if they are going to put water holes in, to really focus on at least 100 or 80 to 100 gallons and larger. And if you're only going to put one in, it's 20, 30, 40. That most of the time wouldn't bother with that. So They're just going to run out if they're in an active spot. And we've also had with those tanks, I've had them stick halfway out of the ground, and when you have deer that come through that aren't used to those tanks, I've seen them negatively avoid them, especially in the high pressure states. When we get down into Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Kentucky, areas where the deer don't have a lot of hunting pressure, that's not as much of a concern, where they don't really mind those objects. But boy, in Wisconsin, I've seen them avoid them, and even in Michigan, some of the high pressure states where they notice anything out of them.
Yeah, they're pretty cagey here around Pennsylvania. That's for sure. I would probably recommend
definitely
putting it into the ground. Yeah. But is there anything that you're planning or doing in terms of habitat around those water holes to make them any more attractive, or to have deer kind of congregate around those, or is it just more the strategic placement of them?
The strategic placement, but then at the same time, that's a real good question, because that kind of reminds me that I would never place a water hole unless it's within bow shot of a tree stand. So they're exceptional for directing traffic during the fall. And if you can't shoot to it with a bow, then as a big archer, now I do gun hunt, I do muzzleloader hunt too, but I love bow hunting. And so in theory, if you have a water hole, it could be pulling deer away from your bow stands. And I want to put in a line of movement with my stand. And that line of movement, it's around a lot of my water holes, I'm adding a mock scrape. And so I use a lot of vines. I'm hanging that vine down near the mock scrape, or near the water hole. Water holes are more like springtime for me, and then I'm focusing on those mock scrapes more into the summertime. Okay. Great compliment. Nice. To both, and that helps enhance the movement by the tree stand too.
Nice. What now? Is there anything I know you can do this in Pennsylvania, of course, but in certain places you can't because of some of the there's a specific CWD hot zone that unfortunately both of my properties are near. But are you an advocate for any type of mineral that you like to put out or anything like that during this time of year?
Not a specific mineral, and I've talked to a lot of very people that are a lot smarter than me, and especially when it comes to whitetail deer research. And I haven't found any conclusive evidence where minerals actually build deer antlers or are that. It's kind of with people taking minerals. Some people are vitamins. There's a lot of different beliefs either way. Bottom line is, though, I haven't found any source that I can think of where it actually hurts deer. Right. So I've used minerals in the spring in Michigan when it was legal, but bottom line, great spot for a trail camera. And so for the summertime trail cam pictures, that's what I use minerals for. I also use minerals as kind of a belt to hold all the movement together. So you're looking at water holes, mock scrapes, potential mineral if legal, on the way from deer bedding to afternoon food sources. It's just one more aspect of habitat creation and habitat improvement that you can use to put all the pieces together to move deer from point A to point B. Also, whether it's Waterhole, Mock Scrape, or Mineral Station, all great places for a trail camera to monitor that movement too. And I need to mention in the spring, great time when you're cutting those bedding areas. I'm typically adding, especially if it's all hardwood, conifers at a rate of 75 to 100 per acre in clumps of 2 to 5 scattered randomly within those cuttings, usually in the form of white pine, white spruce, which are both shade tolerant and a little bit deer resistant in the form of the spruce. So
interesting. Yeah, we got a ton of conifer on this property. It's the one nice thing that I do. It's good and it's bad, right? Because I've been a good student of yours, where I've learned it's great for thermal cover and it's great for certain applications. But one thing that it's not great for is it doesn't really provide much more than that type of thermal cover. So too much of a good thing can be bad, I guess, with an old cliche.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. But it does have some thermal cover, which is nice. On this specific property. I want to go back for a second and just talk about food for a quick second, because I know we talked a little bit about what you're looking for spring Greenup and stuff like that. But I want to kind of talk specifically to that person who maybe has a really small property, and maybe he or she has 20 acres or something like that. Where they're going to be really limited in what they're able to put in, and maybe they found the strategic spot where they want to put a food plot. Say that person is putting a food plot in this spring. What would your recommendation be for if they could only put one food plot in? What would you recommend for them to use, or how would you recommend they approach it?
And this is going to go against the grain a little bit, but on my properties, you're really looking at, now if that person is in a remote setting where there's not a lot of deer, then and you want to build soil, then buckwheat is a great soil builder, and deer also like it, especially in areas that are remote, wooded, wilderness areas, because there's no competition. And you're using that summer food source that you're going to convert over into the fall to something else to start building a herd and establishing a pattern of use on that food plot. But on all my food plots, on my 3 parcels in Wisconsin and a lot of my client properties, unless you're putting in the corn or beans in the spring, then really you're not putting much in, if anything at all. I don't put anything in the spring because, for one, the deer have everything they need. It's a time of plenty in the deer woods. I really want those deer to be out on my neighbors' ag fields in the case of an ag location. And then there's some other strategies we can discuss in the summer segment. But really, if you want to establish a deer herd, buckwheat is a great option because it grows quickly. It can offer a spring food source. And that would be probably my number one recommendation. If you're putting oats, rye, winter wheat, they're not going to eat it until the fall, and it needs to be fall planted. So if you plant it in the spring, it's not going to be of any use for food. Clover is a great spring food source, but at the same time, again, it is a time of plenty in the deer woods, and it'll take clover a good 6 to 8 weeks to really grow appreciably in the spring and into the summer. So you're missing a lot of quality feeding opportunity during those 4 to 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks.
So, kind of keeping on with the theme of food, I've heard you talk in the past about food at the right time, and I think that's one thing that you're kind of emphasizing here with having the buckwheat as the soil builder, and as we talked about earlier in this segment, really kind of focusing on what that spring Greenup is going to be, because as you mentioned, once spring hits, there's deer food aplenty is around for them, but you've talked in the past about food at the right time and to avoid turning a property into a dough factory. Can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yes. Yeah. And we'll hit that pretty good in the summer segment too. But what a dough factory is, it's pretty easy to create a dough factory. And you do that by applying too much hunting pressure and having great habitat. And what I mean by that is does need really thick cover during the summertime for fawning cover, whether it's in the form of it's high stem count cover. That could be grass, briars, hardwood regeneration, shrubs. Very thick cover could be goldenrod, ragweed, overgrown fields. Great fawning cover. That cover, a lot of times, is what the deer herd needs in the fall, too. So if you have high-quality summer food in the form of, say, soybeans, clover fields, alfalfa, and then you have high stem count habitat, then you can expect great fawning grounds for does. And when you have great fawning grounds, you have a lot of does and fawns, and it's competitive. They're there every summer, and they can literally eat out of house and home. So when you get into the fall, you have a really hard time keeping up with the deer herd that's already there, hitting your fall food sources when they're growing. And we can talk about that later, but I often find that when you offer a huge amount of summer food, you have to double up on the amount of food plots you would have in the fall to make the, to offer enough food for the deer to make it through January and February.
Right.
So because you have that army of does right there waiting, they take it over, and does take up space. And so bucks, that's why bucks are last to the field. It's not because they're just sitting back there 100 yards away waiting for the does to go by. It's because they're typically behind the does and fawns, and if you don't have enough room to hold does, fawns, adequate cover close to those food sources, and then room for bucks behind them, you're just not going to have any room left over for bucks. At least bucks that focus on your food sources every single day. So very easy for does to take up space, and there's a lot of reasons for that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one thing that I've learned on one of our properties is that we made a mistake when we put the first food plot in, and we were inexperienced at that point, and it turned into exactly what you're saying, a Dole Factory, and it's fortunately that field's getting ready to roll over again because it was a perennial, and so now we're looking at more of the approach of what you're talking about, is that we have to be mindful about what we put in there, because we want to make sure that we're getting, the quote I kind of stole from you, making sure that we have the right food at the right time. It's like, sure, we want some stuff during Greenup, but I don't want the property necessarily to hold a ton of does. I want there to be enough there that the deer that are living on the property get what they need, but that I'm not pulling deer off of every other property around me at that time. But once we get into the fall season, I want to make sure that I've got the right food for that time of year. That way the deer that I am holding aren't necessarily leaving. Or have to leave to find food, And I think a lot of that, and I've heard you talk about this as well, is taking into consideration what you have in your neighborhood. What does the neighbor have versus what do I have? When are the deer going to be most adequately supported on his property or his or her property versus my property? What time of year is each of our properties best? And making sure you're kind of balancing those things, especially if you're going to, if your plant season is in the spring, if you're doing it right now, it's like that's one of the things you want to think about is how are you managing that, not just this year, especially if you're doing a perennial, but how's it going to impact you, years to come. So I think there's some good food for thought. But go ahead.
What's that? I was just going to say that one of the things with critical food at critical times is it's not always about offering a 10 as a food source. It's offering something that is different than the local habitat. So offering, say, alfalfa in the middle of summer or early summer when that local habitat's a 10 and your food source is a 10, there's not really much of a difference in what you're offering. Now, offering rye that might be a 5 or 6 on the scale of food plotting at a time when the local habitat is 0 is really making a difference. You're a plus 5 or 6 if you look at it that way, as opposed to offering a great food source at a time when your habitat's already at its peak for the year.
Right. No,
so really thinking about that, the critical timing of what the deer actually need and when.
Yeah, there's a lot to take in other than just throwing seed in the ground, and I think that's why. I wanted to do the mini series here with this is because I think a lot of folks, especially if they're just starting out, that's their first approach, because it can sometimes get a little overwhelming, and hopefully we're shedding some light on just some decisions that you can make during the different times of year to help you have some better success and set yourself up for less heartache and backache maybe down the line. But to wrap up the spring and habitat planning section, Jeff, why don't you go ahead and give us the Jeff Sturgis tips for assessing spring planning and habitat for the spring?
Well, I really like to see people have those spring green food sources right before spring greenup. So just keep in mind, once spring greenup hits, the deer have everything they need. Now, at that time, before spring greenup and at spring greenup, I love putting in my water holes. It's easy to get them into the ground. A lot of times you get the benefits of rainfall. Great time to control your weeds for future food plots or start controlling, or hopefully June germinating switchgrass. So it's a great time to start spraying, whether it's simazine in March or your first Roundup application in April sometime. And so the green food sources, the chemicals, water holes, all great aspects. And then, of course, tree planting. So really good time to, if you've created some cuttings, you want to diversify your hardwood cuttings, to get those conifers in there at a rate of 75 to 100 per acre in clumps, and really trying to change the diversity within your hardwood settings. So good time to add diversity, meet some green food sources, get some water holes going, and get your chemicals started.
All right. Awesome. Well, guys, you heard it here. The Jeff Sturgis 3 tips for spring planting. Thanks for coming on, buddy.
Yeah. Thanks for having me again, Clint. Love being a part of this series.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank Jeff for joining us again this week for the spring habitat updates. If you haven't yet, make sure to head over to whitetailhabitatsolutions.com and check Jeff out, and make sure to follow him also on all of his social media platforms. Great follow, great content, and you won't be disappointed. Also, want to give a big thank you to all of you for listening. And as I'd mentioned in the upfront, if you would have a few extra minutes, if it wouldn't be too much to ask, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating. And also be sure to subscribe to the podcast. That way you make sure to receive each podcast as it releases on your mobile devices. And before we shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners that continue to help us make this podcast possible. Wicked Tree Gear, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Tecumani Seed, Glacier Coolers, Ramcat Broadheads, and Trophy Taker Rests. And until next time, we'll see y'all.
I ain't welcome anymore. A long time coming, if it all. It takes a special knowing to colorful. Damaged heads, broken letters. Rationalize yourself in numbers, but